Hey everybody, sorry it's been a couple of years since my last video. Just had some things and stuff going on, and my old cheap camera finally died on me, and I had to save up some money and figure out what kind of camera I was going to buy. This time I finally bought one of the cheapest name brand cameras I could find, so hopefully this will do a lot better. Alright, well, guy brought me this Husqvarna 445, and I thought I would take this opportunity to show you how to turn screwdrivers on these things, or at least carburetor wise. The guy that had it, he's an old guy, and he said it felt like it didn't have any compression. Well, on these there is a decompression button, and it was depressed, and when I pull the button out, it feels like it has plenty of compression. I think he was only worried about that. Maybe he forgot that it had a decompression. I don't know. But anyway, I fired it up with the gas that he had in it, which probably wasn't a good idea. I'm not even sure it was gas, but it ran like crap and would just bog whenever I would hit the trigger. So a lot of you would say, well, you should have tried it with fresh gas to begin with. I've seen things run better with worse fuel, so we're going to go ahead and just leave the gas out of the tank for now, and check on the carburetor first. So what you do with these things is they have these handy dandy little clips that sometimes break on you, but these aren't broken. You just pop a little screwdriver in there. There's 3 of them, 2 on the back and 1 on the front here. Make sure your decompression lever is pushed all the way in. It would probably help if you engage the chain brake. Pull that cover off, and oops, see, I've already been in here. You would have something that looks like that for an air filter, and just a little wire that holds it on there. Now I'll take you around here and show you what you'll be looking at. Okay, once you've taken the air filter off, you should see something that looks like this. There'll be 4 screws, 2 at the top, 2 at the bottom, and all 4 of these have to come out in order to get the carburetor off, which is a bit of a pain on these particular saws. The at least the 445 and 450. Haven't had the pleasure of working on the 440 or 435. They may be the same way, not sure. And these are 4mm Allen heads, so we're just going to go ahead and zip those out. Alright, once you've taken the 4 screws out, it still won't come out because it's hooked into these little rubber bushings down here. So all you do is take a small screwdriver and just kind of wedge it in between the plastic and the rubber there. If I can get my hand out of the way, I can show you better. Just gently kind of lift up on the plastic piece as you're persuading the rubber outward, and you'll get one side to pop out, and come over here and gently work that one out, and you got to kind of turn it a little bit because your primer bulb is also attached to this thing, and you got some wires going to the kill switch. wires out of the way. And if you can, just kind of, without trying to disconnect anything yet, just swing that out of the way if you can. Alright, now I'm just gonna close the choke on it because there's a lot of debris on the carburetor there that I don't want falling in when I'm removing it. Okay, give you a different angle here. Now that you've found the place where the plastic cover will stay out of the way, you'll see something that looks like this. Now this down here is your carburetor, and this secondary butterfly thingy up here. Now there's no gas that flows through this. This is only an air butterfly, but it has to come off, and well, I gotta pop the choke loose anyway. The way you do that is just pull it loose from the rubber boot there, and just kind of swing that linkage up, and it comes out like so. Set that thing out of the way, and then I know I don't have good enough lighting in here for you to see, but I'm going to see if I can zoom in and show you what we got to do next. Okay, here's where it's a bit of a pain. You see how this throttle linkage works. Now there is a this thing has a throttle cable, and what you're looking at right here is the end of the throttle cable. So we have to get that out from around this plastic piece here. And if I remember correctly, what I would do is go down underneath here, grab the cable. Well, no, scratch that idea. Okay, hold your trigger back and then put your finger up here at the top of this so it can't go nowhere. Let tension off of the trigger. That'll loosen up the cable a little bit. You can get in there with a little hook tool or a very thin pair of needle nose, and just work that out and around, and make sure it doesn't pop back into place before you can release it there. Alright, next you can start easing the carburetor off. Try not to tear the intake boot, because as you can see the carburetor screws straight to this boot, and it's got some wiggle in it. I guess there's a reason for that. You might or might not have to do some gentle prying. Okay, I think we're ready to come out there. Now would be a good time to disconnect the fuel line, and if you've emptied the gas and depressurized the fuel tank, you probably don't have to worry about getting squirted in the face right now. Uh-oh, there's a little bit left in the line. Let's open the gas cap a little bit and let that drain back into the tank. Now you've got one more line over here, which is the suction line from the primer bulb. And there's your carburetor. Go ahead and lock that closed and just take the air compressor and blow some of the schmoo off of there, and then we'll tear into this carburetor and see what it looks like. Alright, well, after you've done your air blowing action, you want to get yourself one of these handy dandy blue towels that you use in your shop all the time. Lay the carburetor on that just to keep the other dirt from your workbench out of this doohickey. This particular carburetor is a Zama, and most of your butterfly type chainsaw and weed eater carburetors go together and take apart about the same way. This one has some extra fancy little doodads here for the throttle cable and whatnot, and this one has the impulse pipe instead of a lot of carburetors will have a hole much like this where the fuel pumping side of the carburetor gets its impulse from the crankcase. This one has a little pipe that sticks into a hole on the bottom of the intake. Alright, some carburetors make it easier to take one side off and then the other side. This one, it really doesn't matter. We'll go on and check in the metering diaphragm side, because in my own personal experience, this is the side that the diaphragm always hardens up on and causes your running problems. Not that the pump diaphragm on the other side can't go bad. It just seems like the metering diaphragm is always the first to go. And if your cover there won't come off just by pulling it, try to shoot your screws all over the workbench like I just did, with a little gentle persuasion from the handle of your screwdriver. And just kind of feel of the diaphragm, and that's not bad. Don't really want to take this apart now, but I'm going to see if I can just gently peel this off without it tearing, because I might just put it back together with the same diaphragm if there's nothing wrong with it. Okay, now that's still a good usable diaphragm. Most of the time when I crack into one of these, this diaphragm is crispier than a tater chip, and they don't work when they get that way. Alright, what you'll see here once you get in here, I don't know if I'm going to take this gasket off or not and risk tearing it, but I really don't even think I'm going to have to clean this carburetor. We'll take the pump diaphragm side off and see. But if you didn't know, you have this little lever here. This is your metering lever, and as the diaphragm is chooching up and down with the impulse from the crankcase, it's picking up on this little metering inlet needle, and it's giving it just the right amount of gas, and that lever pivots on this little pin that goes across here and gets held in by this screw. So let's go ahead and take the pump side off and see if we got anything interesting going on in there. this side you'll have a diaphragm with a gasket under it. It looks okay. You should probably go ahead and throw a rebuild kit in a carburetor like this every time you have it apart, but you know, sometimes you don't have time to wait on parts to come, and you gotta just, you know, see if you can get her going. There's a tiny bit of debris down there. Now there's a little screen down in this hole, and what you're looking at actually is the underside of the metering hole. So you don't want to squirt any cleaner in there until you've removed the needle. So we'll go ahead and take that needle out and shoot some cleaner in there. You know, put your finger on the metering lever as you're removing the screw, because there is a spring under there that will go flying. It can be a bit of a booger to get this out while the gasket is still on, but like I said, I don't want to risk ruining the gasket right now. And there's your little inlet needle. It's got a rubbery material on the tip, so that's why you don't want to spray carb cleaner in there until you've removed this, because the carb cleaner can sometimes make this thing swell up, and then it really not going to run right. Alright, so we're just prepping the carb for a little bit of spray down here, and you want to do one more thing. And if you watched my previous carb rebuilding video, you might notice I took it down because of well, one thing is a comment I received about a mistake I made, and I went back and looked, and sure enough I did make the mistake. I had pulled this screen out and then started poking around in there to clean the hole out before I had removed the needle. Don't do that. So this time I'm going to get it right. And also, somebody else mentioned that he saw me clean a carburetor without removing the adjusting screws. Well, yeah, on that carburetor I could have removed the adjusting screws. On some carbs though, they have these annoying little plastic limiter caps on there that only allow you a certain range of adjustment within you know, useless government guidelines, and it still kind of makes the machine run a little too lean, even when you max it out to their specifications. There are ways of removing those, but anyway, this carburetor does not have the limiters, so we're going to go ahead and take out both of the adjustment screws. This particular carburetor takes what is called a splined adjustment tool, and before you take these screws out, you want to screw them in until they stop and count the turns so that you can see where it was at, and go back to that adjustment when you get it back together. I'm not saying it won't need some you know, some adjustment after you get done, but at least you'll know that you're in the ballpark of where it was when it was last running. So we're just going to gently count half turn, one turn, and starting to get tight right there. So what was that, about 1 1/4 turns? And if you'll look, you'll see a letter L here. That's the low adjustment screw. So either take these out one at a time and clean out the hole and replace them, or if you're going to take them both out at the same time, make sure you have a little tray or something with L and H marked so that you can put the low screw in the L tray and the high screw in the high tray, because most of the time these adjustments needles are different. Now once you take that out, you want to just you know, grab a corner of your paper towel there and clean off that tip. Do the same thing for the high side. Count your turns. Half, 1. Yeah, they're both about 1 1/4. Take that one out. Wipe it off. And now you can get your spray nozzle down in those holes and every little orifice you see. Just give it a good spraying out. Now if you use your air blower to dry this thing off after you've sprayed carburetor cleaner in there, make sure you don't blow your screen out there if you don't have one to replace it with. Alright, so that pretty much looks good. We'll go ahead and put our adjusting screws back in. We'll screw them all the way down until they stop, and then back them off 1 1/4 turns to get it back to where it was. Now once you feel it stop, you don't want to continue cranking down on it. You can ruin your carburetor by doing that. You just, once it stops, you stop. Okay, so it stopped, and we're going to go half, 1 1/4. And the low side was adjusted the same way. Once we get this back together and test it, we may or may not have to do some additional adjusting. Go ahead and put the pump diaphragm side back on. And sometimes you have to hold your throttle out of the way so that it doesn't hit on your idle adjustment and make it difficult to get this cover back on. Put our metering side back together, and I found it handy to have a magnetized screwdriver, and go ahead and put the screw that holds your metering lever pin down. Go ahead and have that on the screwdriver. We'll see if we can do this with the gasket still on. Carefully put your spring back in there. And if you have trouble with that spring staying up, you can use a tiny dab of grease or Vaseline or just something petroleum based that won't harm the carburetor and will dissolve when gasoline hits it. most of the time I have good luck with getting them to stay in place without having to use any kind of grease. But you gotta have a steady hand and be really careful. Now you want to put your pin through your metering lever and hang your needle in that little fork. Carefully get it down in there. And this is why I say go ahead and have your screw on your magnetized screwdriver, because you got to hold this down with one hand and start the screw with the other. And just make sure that chooch is okay. Now, the height of this metering lever is important, and Walbro and Zama each have their own little gauges to use to measure the height of this. And because I'm not too keen on, but you have to have this gasket off to do that, and because I'm not too keen on trying to remove this gasket at the moment, we're just gonna assume that's in the correct position. Okay, put our diaphragm back on. And our lid, cover, whatever. Just get them all run down, and then you can hand torque them. And the way I like to do it is just go in a corner to corner cross pattern there, X pattern. And remember, you're screwing into aluminum, so don't over tighten. I like to do it in stages so that it goes down evenly. Click, click. My wrist is a fine-tuned torque wrench. Alright, we can throw this thing back on the saw, and as soon as the storm blows over outside, we can put some fresh fuel in her and see what it does. We'll get back. Okay, we're ready to stick this carburetor back on. Now, before you do that, you want to make sure that your sealing surfaces on the both down here where the carburetor goes and on your little secondary air inlet doohickey, make sure those are free of debris, because these things really don't like to run with air leaks. Okay, you may have to get that out of the way just a little bit. And you want to make sure that your little impulse pipe goes into its little hole. You may want to go ahead and hook up the fuel line while the carburetor is out here, and same with your suction line for the primer. Go ahead and hook those up. Lined up and going in there. If it doesn't feel like it's going, something ain't right. Now you need to fish your throttle cable out and pull the throttle butterfly back, and just take you some pliers and get the cable in its track where it's supposed to go, and theoretically once you let it loose and pump it a couple of times, that'll just fall right into where it's got to be. Okay, now you want to remember which way your secondary thing goes. Pull the throttle, stick your linkage for that back in this little slot, let it go back, and set that thing back on its little perch. And then this part can be a little tricky. You gotta kind of route these wires so that nothing binds up in your throttle linkage, and get your get your primer bulb in its hole there. Sometimes this part is a little aggravating. I really think these wires are supposed to go kind of on top of where the adjustment screws are in the carburetor, but I think it might actually be better if they tucked under the carb. So we'll try that. Get that set down and reverse the procedure. Take your little screwdriver, kind of pull that rubber over a little bit. Get her to go in one side. Shoehorn it in on the other side. Make sure all your holes seem to line up. And for this part, you're going to want to hand torque these. Don't use your little zippity gun. The long screws go on the bottom, the short screws go on the top. Just kind of hold everything while you're tightening down. And you're screwing into plastic here, so you don't want to get too terribly tight. Just tight enough. And I like to just run those down and get the top screws in. I said these are 4mm Allen, but 5/32 also works. Now there's no traditional gasket on this per se, it's just kind of a rubbery sealing surface on there, so that's why you didn't see me mention anything about a gasket between the carburetor and the intake. Next thing that goes on is your air filter, and then just swing that little wire up and clip her on there. Make sure everything works and isn't binding up on anything. Stick your cover back on. snap it on there. And once it stops raining outside, we'll put some fresh gas in it and see what it does now. Alright, well, it's now the next day because yesterday it was raining and I couldn't complete this test. I put some fresh go-go juice in this thing, and I haven't tested it out at all yet, so we're going to see what this thing does now. We're going to make sure we put it on the choke, prime it a bunch of times because the lines were emptied. That should be good. Make sure our compression release is in.
We'll let that warm up for a minute, but I think I'm going to have to adjust the low speed screw on the carburetor.
Oh, it seems to run all right, but I think I might need to sharpen the chain for the guy before I send it back. Alright, well, decided I'm gonna do the right thing and sharpen the guy's chain for him before I send the saw back and test it again, because it didn't want to cut through that oak very well, and it was trying to cut out a circle. And it looks like this is 325 pitch chain, which is correct for this model saw. And it doesn't really look like this chain's been filed before, but some of the teeth are sitting at the wrong angle. I think this guy's kind of hard on his equipment. But we're going to snatch this chain off, and then I'll show you how I hand sharpen a chain. Just loosen that bar nut up there, and then I like these saws that have the tensioner on the side here. We're just going to loosen that up a little bit. Take that nut off all the way. Pull our side cover off there. Just work the chain off. Alright, now we're going to stick this thing in the vise, and I'll show you how I sharpen. Alright, well, I'm going to have to adjust my camera angle before I get to filing, but I just wanted to show you how I like to sharpen a chain. I put it in a vise, and I just have the vise clamped down on the drive links. I'm not clamping down on anything up here, because if you do, then your tooth is going to move and you won't get a very good filing. So just clamp it down on the drive links only. I do not like to hand file a chain while it's still on the saw, just because things move around too much. You know, sometimes out in the field you might need to do that, but you know, if your chain gets too dull out in the field, just carry a spare chain with you and sharpen them when you get home. Alright, another thing that I want to do while the camera is set up right here is kind of explain what I'm going to be doing here. Now, I freehand file my chains. I don't need any guides or gimmicks or fancy doodads. With enough practice, and if you know what you're trying to do, you can get perfect results with just nothing but a file. Okay, and I have to give a big shout out to another YouTuber, Buck and Billy Ray Smith, for showing me through his videos really how to do this. So I'm really going to kind of explain his technique, which is now my technique. Now, old Buck and Billy always says, get the gullet. Well, what is the gullet? This is the gullet. Now you see how it kind of starts to ramp up right there. So you want to file this down a little bit. This one's not too bad, but sometimes you'll see chains that people had tried to file on and it's just a big slope going up, and they're really not sharpening the tooth at all. So the reason for getting this gullet down is to make room for the file to get under this tooth and form the hook that you need in order for it to cut properly. Now, if you don't cut that gullet out, what will happen is the file, if you only start just filing straight back instead of going a little bit down first, you'll end up eventually with a ramp going up here, and you'll just be rounding off your tooth and not sharpening. So let me show you what that looks like. Oh, also, just a little preview of some other saws that you'll be seeing me play with in future videos. Like I said, things and stuff have been going on since my last video, and I've got some other stuff in the works that I'll be making videos on that you'll see shortly. Not just about chainsaws and stuff, but I'm still going to do this. Okay, now this 325 pitch chain takes a 3/16 round file, and what we're just going to start doing is we're just going to kind of file straight down and file that gullet down just a little bit. Now, old Buck and Billy likes to go in sort of a motion like this that he calls the boat, and that just kind of helps to hog out that material a little quicker. And just depending on how far up your gullet is sticking, you don't have to go very far. As a matter of fact, I think just that 3 strokes was enough for that. So once you've, one more, why not? So once you've got that gullet out of the way and you've made room for the file to come back in there and form the C that you want, now you got to think about angle. Now, most chains will have a line scribed in the top of each tooth that shows you the proper angle to file at, and that's also the point at which when your filing gets all the way back to that line, that's when the chain is trash and needs to be replaced. But now you got to think about angle. So not only do you need to have the correct angle this way, but you need to also concern yourself with your angle this way, because it doesn't matter if you're holding the perfect angle in this direction. If you're holding too far down on the handle, you're going to end up filing more on this side of the tooth and actually flattening off the angle, or if you hold too far up on the handle, you'll be creating too much of an angle. Now, it just takes a little bit of practice, and you know, if you have some old chains that you don't really care about, that's good to, you know, get started with your filing there. One thing that I also like to do is I just take a marker and mark the first tooth that I'm starting on, just because it's easier to see where I began. Alright, now once you've got the gullet out of the way, now you can start filing straight back. Back to the next tooth, get the gullet out, and then go straight back. Now, I'm not sawing back and forth with the file. You don't want to do that. If you hear it dragging back, that's just not even any pressure on it, just kind of tinkling across the surface there. Tap your file every now and then to clear some of the shavings out. Might also be a good idea to wear gloves when you're doing this. I'm going to take you off the tripod here and just show you what you should be looking for here. Can you see that shape, that C shape, and you see how the tooth comes to a nice point there in the corner? That's what you're looking for right there. That's a good sharp tooth. Now the next thing is, as you file and wear down your tooth, you notice the tooth is at an angle going up. So as you file, your tooth is getting lower and lower, and that means that you've got to compensate by filing down your raker or depth gauge just a little bit. So I'm going to finish filing this, and then we'll come back and show you how I file the rakers. Alright, well, we're done sharpening the chain, and I've already stuck it back on the saw and the bar and all that. Now this is the part that I do prefer to do with the chain installed, and that's filing the rakers. Now you should have a little tool, something like this. There are better ones. This is a cheap one from the big box store that all its shelves are orange. Okay, and what you want to do is just roll her on around until you find your starting mark again, and you just want to lay the thing over so that the raker is sticking up, and you can kind of drag your file across that, and you can feel if it's just a little bit high. So just give her a little bit of filing there. Now your file will rub on the gauge here, so these things will wear out eventually. So just, you know, try not to file too much into your gauge, because you're actually every time you file into it, you're making your raker lower. But yeah, just go on down the line and see which ones need a little bit of touching up. This will make your saw cut properly. Now if the rakers are too high, you won't be cutting much, and if they're too low, well, it's just gonna want to snag in the wood and not cut. So that's all there is to that. Just go all the way around your chain, and if you've done everything right and your bar is in good condition and the rails aren't wore out and the bar's not bent and all that, you should be cutting straight. Now, a lot of people think that you have to pretty much get a micrometer out and make sure that all of your teeth are the exact same length. And while there is a little bit of truth to it, it's not quite what they say it is. You can have some variance in tooth length as long as your rakers are properly adjusted, and you'll cut just fine. Now, that's not to say that you want you know, all the teeth on one side of the chain a good bit shorter than the teeth on the other side of the chain. I mean, you know, try to keep it eyeball, you know, just eyeball the length of the tooth. You know, occasionally, if you get a tooth that, you know, snagged a nail or a rock or something, it's just had the crap beaten out of it, you know, you might have to file that one down a little further than the rest of them, and you know, that's just something you have to deal with. But you know, if your teeth are sharp, your rakers are properly set, and your bar isn't wore out, then you should be cutting pretty straight. Well, I guess that's all for this video. If you like what I'm doing, please like and subscribe and all that, and stay tuned, because I've got some more irons in the fire, and we're going to be doing some more videos and different things. And yeah, see you later.